too fond of books. My name is Janelle, and this is the reading roundup for the second week of March Mystery Madness. Before we get into the books that I've been reading, I need to give you the answer to yesterday's My March Mystery Madness Mindbender. The clue was, this troubled Swedish detective appeared in a number of books before being portrayed by a well-known British actor. And the answer is Kurt Wallander. This series was written by Henning Mankell and are set in Sweden. And this is the first in the series, Faceless Killers. And the British actor who portrayed Kurt Wallander was Kenneth Branagh. So this is a good series. I haven't read very many of them. They are Scandinavian noir. So if that's the type of thing that you like, you might want to check out Henning Mankell's Kurt Wallander series. Stay tuned to the end of the video for the next My March Mystery Madness Mindbender. So let's get into the books that I read this week. In last week's roundup, I mentioned that I had started reading A Bali Conspiracy Most Foul by Shamini Fllint. I don't have a copy to show you. I had to take it back to the library. This is an Inspector Singh Investigates from 2009. Singapore detective Inspector Singh is sent to Bali after terrorists set off a bomb at a nightclub. He is partnered with Bronwyn Taylor, an Australian from the Australian Federal Police. And when a murder victim is discovered shot amongst the victims of the bomb, Singh and Taylor are tasked with the investigation. So I thought it was a very interesting setup. Inspector Singh gets sent to Bali mostly because his bosses don't want him around. They figure it's a great way to get rid of him. He doesn't have any experience with terrorism or bomb investigations or anything. They just send him along. But he is the perfect guy to investigate a murder in the midst of that situation. And I thought that was a great setup to have a murder in the midst of an attack like that. So all of these victims from the bomb, you've got one who is actually a murderer. They found that he had been shot. The victim is Richard Crouch, an English expat. Now, at the beginning of the investigation, they start with nothing. They take a long time to figure out who he is. And then all of a sudden, there are plenty of suspects. I thought it was a good book. It was an interesting premise. I like the character of Inspector Singh. I think he's an interesting guy. His relationship with Bronwyn Taylor from Australia was also very interesting. And I thought it had a great ending. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I also read this week Above the Bay of Angels by Rhys Bowen. This is also a copy from my library. This came out this year. It's a 2020 release. And so I'm using this for the prompt first published in a year divisible by 5. This is historical fiction, and I really enjoyed this book. It was really good. It is a historical mystery, but, and there is a death, there is a murder, but it takes place much later in the book than maybe you would expect. So it's important to know what kind of book it is when you're going into it, because your expectation completely affects your enjoyment of the book. And so I kept waiting for the murder, and I was slightly disappointed until I realized what kind of historical mystery I was reading, and then I just relaxed and went along for the ride because it was really enjoyable. Isabella Waverley only means to comfort the woman felled on a London street. In her final dying moments, she thrusts a letter into Bella's hand. It's an offer of employment in the kitchens of Buckingham Palace, and everything the budding young chef desperately wants, an escape from the constrictions of her life as a lowly servant. In the stranger's stead, Bella can spread her wings. Arriving as Helen Barton from Yorkshire, she pursues her passion for creating culinary delights, served to the delighted Queen Victoria herself. Best of all, she's been chosen to accompany the Queen to Nice. What fortune! Until the threat of blackmail shadows Bella to the Riviera, and a member of the Queen's retinue falls ill and dies. Having prepared the royal guest's last meal, Bella is suspected of the poisonous crime. An investigation is sure to follow. Her charade will be over, and her new life will come crashing down, if it doesn't send her to the gallows. So Bella she's actually from a well-to-do family. Her father is a younger son of a titled family, but he loses all the money. They have really tightened circumstances, and then both of her parents die, and so she actually ends up having to go into service. And so when she finds this woman on the street who's been hit by an omnibus, and this woman thrusts this letter into Bella's hands, she just decides to go for it. So she pretends to be this woman, Helen Barton, and she goes to Buckingham Palace to interview for this job. And then it goes from there. And I really enjoyed this. It was a very entertaining read. I gave it 4 stars. I also read this week Death Cap by June Thompson. This book is from the 70s. Yes, 77. And this was for the prompt published in May. It was published in May of 1977. Now this book, it was good. It was fine. It was an entertaining mystery. It made me think of Midsummer Murders. And I think that that's because the main character is Inspector Rudd, and he is from the county CID. And he's in an area where he gets sent out to investigate to the neighboring villages. And I think that's what made me think of Midsummer Murders. So he is in the office one day, and he's opening his mail, and he receives this letter. The message on it was short and was printed in the same awkward capitals. Mrs. King of Abbot Stacy was poisoned on purpose. It was murder. So he gets this letter and he realizes that he has to investigate. So he contacts the village Bobby, essentially is what this guy is, and to find out what he knows about the death of Mrs. King. And what was interesting in this book is Inspector Rudd was pretty hampered in his investigation for most of the book, because it was never clear if the victim had been murdered or was it an accident. They come to realize that she had eaten a poisonous mushroom. Was it an accident? Was it murder? And the fact that they didn't know really hampered his investigation. There's a lot about the past, about history in this book. For example, but once more he felt that sense of the past come over him, of old loves and old alliances, and possibly of old hates. And he made a mental note to talk to Holbrook about it the next day. So there's a lot about history and the past. People who have been in a village for generations, as opposed to people who were new to the village, like Mrs. King, who'd only been there for about 3 years. I only gave this one 3 stars because I found the ending a little bit unsatisfying for me, for how I enjoy a mystery, but it was pretty good. And so if you ever get your hands on a June Thompson, go ahead and read it. They're very entertaining. Then, for the prompt of something made of wood on the cover, I read Louise Brindley's Death on the Heath. This is from 2003, and you can see there are these lovely trees on the cover. This book has an amateur detective, and her name is Jerry Frayling. Jerry Frayling is desperately trying to get fit and beautiful before her wedding to fiancé Bill Benteen, who also happens to be her literary agent. She doesn't get far when her first attempt at jogging is interrupted by a distraught young woman, Annie Scott, who has just discovered a body on Hampstead Heath in North London. Jerry befriends Annie, so when she's found dead in a cubicle in the women's cloakroom at King's Cross railway station, Jerry is determined to uncover the secrets that surround Annie's employer's smart residence in Hampstead. Soon the bodies pile up, actors start coming out of the woodwork, and mistaken identities multiply, and Jerry wishes she hadn't gotten herself quite so deeply involved. I only gave this 2 stars. I was really disappointed in this. I thought it was going to be very entertaining. I like a good amateur detective. I like mistaken identities, all of that stuff. But the character of Jerry Fllint drove me crazy. And the way she behaved as an amateur detective is not how I like amateur detectives in mysteries. So, up to a point in this book, her involvement in the case made sense. So this woman comes to her for help on Hampstead Heath. She's found this dead body. And so Jerry goes with her, sees, yes, there is a dead body. She calls the police and she waits for them to arrive and makes a statement. All of that makes complete sense. But then how she continues to involve herself later on just really drove me crazy. So then, once the body of Annie Scott has been found, again, Jerry Fllint convinces herself that she needs to be involved because she had this minor involvement with Annie Scott. And then the DCI on the case actually asks her to help them find the identity of the man on Hampstead Heath. They have not been able to find out who he is. Because of his clothes, they believe he is a tramp. And so, for whatever reason, it's a little bit unclear, the DCI decides to ask Jerry to go and investigate and see if she can find the identity of this tramp. So that's fine. She goes and she investigates, and she does actually end up finding out the identity of the tramp. But rather than going straight to the police and with this information, she decides, no, she's going to talk to this man who helped her identify, who knew the dead man, and she is going to get his employment records from this guy, and then she photocopies them all before she decides to go and tell the police. So it's actually a couple of days before she tells the police the identity of this tramp. And I just didn't understand why she would do that. Jerry's immediate reaction had been to ring Inspector Bramwell, imparting news of her success. Discovery of the dead man's identity would be a feather in her cap. On second thoughts, the more information she could give him, the better. First and foremost, proof positive of the man's identity, his last known address, for instance, a word with his landlady, perusal of Barmby's list, taking nothing for granted a la Virginia Vale, her fictitious super sleuth. What? I didn't get that at all. And then later she's having a discussion with her fiance about this exact situation. So, what's on the agenda today? Bill asked over breakfast. A visit to Scotland Yard to hand in your notice as a secret agent? Not quite yet, Jerry said meekly. Sorry, Bill. I know you disapprove, but I have important leads to follow up, and I can't leave my work unfinished. That's all well and good, darling, but try to see things from my point of view. You're a writer, for heaven's sake, not a detective. So why not stick to writing and leave the sleuthing to the professionals? Just hand over those files to DCI Bramble and let him sort things out. I can't, Bill. Jerry shook her head. Because of Annie Scott. She trusted me, you see. The thought of letting her down is unbearable. I'm sorry, but that does not make any sense at all. There is no reason for her to think that she needs to follow up any kind of leads. That's the job of the police. And Annie Scott trusted her? Maybe a little bit, but what does that have to do with her giving the police the name of this dead man? I really didn't understand her behavior at all. So she goes on, she proceeds to interview someone who could identify the victim, photocopy the employment records, then she goes to the victim's house for some reason and snoops around. And so when she does actually end up telling the police the identity of the tramp, they seem to have absolutely no problem at all that she took days to give them this information. As a matter of fact, they thank her for helping them out. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me at all. And then they go back and forth about her level of involvement. This DCI, then he goes on to say, okay, you're done, you don't need to be involved anymore. And then later he's like, actually, can you help us out with this? Oh no, you don't get involved anymore. Oh no, wait, help us out with this. Like, it really didn't make any sense at all. And then she ends up, like, she guesses stuff out of almost nowhere, and then it turns out to be right, and that drove me crazy. So in the end, I only gave this 2 stars, and I am not interested at all in finding any more in this series. So this one was a big miss for me. But then I ended up reading a book that I completely loved. This is An English Murder by Cyril, Hare, written in 1951. And this was for the prompt, 5 Tropes I Love. Now, I chose this book because I hoped that I would find 5 tropes that I loved in here. I knew there were a couple, but sometimes you don't actually know about tropes used in a story until you start to read it. So this did end up having 5 tropes that I loved. It is a closed circle story, and I love that trope. It takes place at a country house. I love that trope. They're snowed in and cut off. I love that trope. There's an amateur detective, and I really do enjoy that trope when it's done well. And then there is an unlikable victim, and I quite enjoy that trope as well. So there were a few things about this book that fit prompts. It has 5 tropes that I love. It had 5 suspects. It was published in 1951. It has 175 pages, and the author has 5 letters in his name. So there were plenty of reasons why this was a great one to read for this March Mystery Madness video or challenge. But the most important thing was that I really loved this book. It was very entertaining. So it takes place at Warbeck Hall, and Lord Warbeck is dying. He knows that he's ill. He knows that he's dying. It could be his last Christmas, and so he chooses to invite some family to spend Christmas at his house. Dr. Wenceslas Botwink, which is an awesome name, by the way. He is also German, so it could be pronounced Botwink. He is an academic. He is a foreigner, so that plays a big role in this story. Briggs is the butler, and he has been with the family for years, and he is like the quintessential English butler. He takes his job extremely seriously. Sir Julius Warbeck arrives to spend Christmas. He is the first cousin of Lord Warbeck. He is also a cabinet minister. He is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Lady Camilla Prendergast is there. She is a distant relative, but also in love with Robert, who is the son of Lord Warbeck. Robert is also a fascist. And then Mrs. Carstairs, her father was the rector of the parish, and she grew up and she spent a lot of time in the house. And she is also the wife of a rising politician. Her husband is kind of an assistant to Sir Julius. And then we also have Sergeant Rogers, who is a protection officer with he's a protection officer with Special Branch, and he is there to protect Sir Julius Warbeck. That's his job. He goes wherever Sir Julius goes. And so you've got this great setup for a closed circle English country house mystery where they are snowed in and cut off. And Christmas Eve, as they are ringing in Christmas Day, it is midnight, and Robert drinks his champagne and then falls dead. And so this was so great. I really liked this mystery. I gave it 4.5 stars, and the only reason I didn't give it 5 stars was because the ending was a tad abrupt for me. I like a little denouement, and it was quite abrupt, but it was very, very entertaining, and I can highly recommend An English Murder by Cyril Hare. I also read Death is in the Air by Kate Kingsbury, and this was to fulfill the prompt for 5 words in the title. Death is in the Air, 5 words exactly. And this came out in 2001. This is the second book in the series, but I felt like it was okay that I hadn't read the first one, because you got enough information about characters and situations that I felt like I could just jump right into the story. And so in this one, the main character is Elizabeth Compton, and I found her a very interesting character. This is what I would consider a historical cozy. It is set during World War II. I think it's probably about 1942, 1943, and I'm just going to read the back. In World War II England, the quiet village of Sittingmarsh is faced with food rations and fear for loved ones. But Elizabeth Hartley Compton, lady of the manor house, stubbornly insists that life must go on. Sittingmarsh residents depend on Elizabeth to make sure things go smoothly, which means everything from sorting out gossip to solving the occasional murder. Dangerous enemy on the loose, reads the newspaper headlines. When a German pilot crash lands and escapes into the nearby woods, locals are in a panic. But Lady Elizabeth caught a good glimpse of the fellow as he parachuted down, and he seemed nothing more than a harmless, terrified young boy. Until a local girl is found murdered the very day he disappears. Coincidence? The constable thinks not, but Elizabeth suspects everyone's jumping to conclusions, and once again she's in the thick of a murderous muddle, combing for clues and searching for answers before more trouble ignites. Now, Elizabeth Compton is a very interesting character. She is the daughter of an earl and owns all the land in the area, including the village and all the houses in the village. And so her parents have died. Her husband is gone. She has divorced him. He was a gambler and just gambled away all of her money. And so she is in the interesting position of being a woman as the squire, essentially. And so not a lot of people have been in that situation, but her village seems to accept the fact that she's taken that role as the leader in the village. And so she takes all of this stuff really seriously. She cares about this village and the people in it. One interesting thing I found about this story was that her butler, so she's got a butler and a housekeeper who have been around for a long time, and the butler is aging and starting to lose his memory, potentially experience a bit of dementia. And he claims to have seen the ghost of her father at the manor house. And so at first they just, think that it has to do with his, starting to experience some dementia, until a few other people claim to see something at the house as well. But then nothing is done about it in this book. And I am not going to dock any marks for that, because I have a sneaking suspicion that that's going to play a big role in the next book in the series. And if it doesn't, then I will say that that was some weak writing, that they missed a huge part of this plot. Why would they say all that and then do nothing about it? So I'm assuming it's going to come up in the next book in the series. But I'm going to definitely look for more in this series. I quite enjoyed it. It was a very entertaining read. So I've also been slowly making my way through an instance of the Fingerpost by Iain Pears. I am still not even halfway through this, but I am really enjoying it. I'm on to the second narrator in this story. There are 4 narrators. This is set in Oxford in 1663, and so far a fantastic historical mystery. I've also started Linwood Barclay's elevator pitch, and I'm going to count this for today in today's video, because I'm going to finish this today. This is set in New York and has a really interesting premise. It all begins on a Monday when 4 people board an elevator in a Manhattan office tower. Although each presses a button for their floor, the elevator proceeds non-stop to the top. Once there, it pauses for a few seconds, but the doors don't open. Then it plummets. right to the bottom of the shaft. It appears to be a random accident, but on Tuesday it happens again in a different Manhattan skyscraper. And then Wednesday brings yet another tragic high-rise catastrophe. In only 3 days, one of the most vertical cities in the world is plunged into chaos. Clearly, this is anything but random. This is a cold, calculated bid to terrorize the city, and it's succeeding. Fearing for their lives, thousands of men and women working in offices across the city refuse to leave their homes. Commerce has slowed to a trickle. Emergency calls to the top floors of the apartment towers go unanswered. Who is behind this? What do these deadly acts of sabotage have to do with the fingerless body found on the High Line? 2 seasoned New York detectives and a straight-shooting journalist race against time to uncover the truth before the city's newest and tallest residential tower has its ribbon cutting on Friday night. With each diabolical twist, Linwood Barclay ratchets up the tension, building to a shattering finale. Elevator Pitch is a riveting tale of psychological suspense that is all too plausible and will chill you to the bone. So I am over halfway through this. I'll finish it today. I'm enjoying it so far. I've never read anything by Linwood Barclay, and I heard about this book because a couple months ago at my book club, one of the people at my book club talked about this book, and so I thought I would check it out. This was from 2019. All right, and then I will give you an update on my March Mystery Madness bingo card. This is what it looks like so far. I'm doing very well. I actually have a bingo, and I'm close to another one, but my goal is to do a blackout. I want to fill this entire bingo card before the end of March. So I've put my words up on post-it notes on the wall because I am running out of space on my book and I need to play around with them, move them around to see if I can make a sentence. And so far, I've got potentials, possibilities, but nothing yet. The best I've got so far is remarkable gentleman told Annie nothing. It's not a full sentence yet, but it's not bad. I've also got the words said, am, and lights down at. There's maybe a bit of a potential there. And hers. So far, this is what I've got for the words from 5th chapter, 5th chapter, 5th page, 5th line, 5th word. All right, the next My March Mystery Madness mind bender is this alliteratively named couple ran a detective agency and worked for British intelligence. So put your answers down in the comments down below, and I will see you tomorrow for another March Mystery Madness video. Bye.